trumpet loudly roar. Babylon is fallen, is fallen, is fallen. Babylon is fallen to rise no more. Babylon is fallen, is fallen, is fallen. Babylon is fallen to rise no more. Sound the trumpets on Mount Zion. Christ shall come a second time, ruling with a rod of iron. All who now as foes combine. Devil's garments we've rejected, and their fellowship is o'er. Babylon is fallen, is fallen, is fallen. Babylon is fallen to rise no more. Babylon is fallen, is fallen, is fallen. Babylon is fallen to rise no more. All her merchants stand with wonder. What is this that comes to pass? Murmuring like a distant thunder, crying all alas, alas. Swell the sound, you kings and nobles, priests and people, rich and poor. Babylon is fallen, is fallen, is fallen. Babylon is fallen to rise no more. Babylon is fallen, is fallen, is fallen. Babylon is fallen to rise no more.
Chapter 18. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. How much she hath glorified herself, and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death, and mourning, and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. And the kings of the earth, who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her, shall bewail her, and lament for her, when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more, the merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and of pearls, and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all Thyine wood, and all manner vessels of ivory, and all manner vessels of most precious wood, and of brass and iron and marble, and cinnamon, and odors, and ointments, and frankincense, and wine, and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and souls of men. And the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. The merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And every shipmaster and all the company and ships and sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stood afar off, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? And they cast dust on their heads, and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness, for in 1 hour is she made desolate. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. And the mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And the voice of harpers and musicians, and of pipers and trumpeters, shall be heard no more at all in thee, and no craftsman, of whatsoever craft he be, shall be found any more in thee. And the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets, and of saints, and of all that were slain upon the earth.
Welcome to the Prophecy Club, and I've got Pastor Dan on the phone with me again today, and he's got newspaper articles, and we're going to talk about them in light of Bible prophecy. Pastor Dan, welcome back to the Prophecy Club.
So glad to be back on with you, Stan, and let's get to some very important news articles. Moscow conducts large-scale nuclear attack drill, Washington pre-beacon. Russian strategic forces carried out a large-scale surprise military drill this last Wednesday, launching 4 nuclear missiles that were closely monitored by U.S. intelligence agencies, United States officials said. The drill began about 9 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time and included test launch of 2 land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles and 2 submarine-based ballistic missiles. The test firings were unusual because of the number of missiles fired at one time, said the officials, who discussed some details of the drill. I've looked at other sources, and the United States said they were surprised by it. Officials said the tests were notified in advance to the United States government as required by the 1988 U.S.-Soviet agreement requiring advance notification of ICBM and SLBM launches. The agreement requires notifying the Nuclear Risk Reduction Center by the Pentagon and the impending launches within 4 days of their launch. Mark Snyder, an arms control specialist, said Russian reports of the exercises described the test firings as a major strategic nuclear exercise involving a nuclear war. The exercises also involved Russian Vladimir Putin as a commander. Snyder, a policy analyst at the National Institute for Public Policy, said the last similar nuclear Russian strategic exercise took place 2 weeks before the 2012 presidential election and was described as the first time Putin personally tested an automated communication and management system for the nuclear forces. The Kremlin spokesman in Moscow said the surprise check of nuclear forces, aerospace defenses, and naval and strategic aviation were ordered by the commander-in-chief, Mr. Putin. Ballistic missiles were launched. The air defense missile systems were used. The spokesman was quoted by the Russian news agencies as saying all launches took place as he expected. The strategic nuclear exercises highlighted Moscow's large-scale nuclear forces buildup under Putin. Russia is developing several new missiles, including a weapon U.S. intelligence agencies have assessed as a covert intermediate-range nuclear missile called the RS-26 and is being developed and tested in apparent violation of the 1987 Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. The Russian government has denied the RS-26 violates the INF Treaty and claims that its new ICBMs, which arms some compliance experts, is in violation of the 2010 START Treaty. In essence, Russia and China have even been working together on this, and they're both seem to be gearing up towards attacking the United States. What do you have to say, Stan?
Dan, I think the Russians are angry. I think they are mad. I think they are fed up with what they would say the West imperialism running over these other nations. Now, the truth is, we really had no cause to go jump in on the situation with Iraq. Yes, I mean, we shouldn't have just stood by and let him overtake Kuwait as he did. But what the real, I mean, through the grapevine, I heard that America sent word that if he were to invade Kuwait, that we would do nothing. And, of course, then he invaded Kuwait for their oil, and then, of course, we did do something. And it makes me think that the real objective was really about oil. You see, The more America gets in debt, the more that we have to have collateral to cover our debts. And the international bankers say, look, you guys got to divvy up or you're going to have to come up with more resources. And that's the real reason that we went into Iraq to steal their oil, Afghanistan, not only their oil, but also to lay a pipeline across Afghanistan to get the Caspian Sea oil out. So there's two wars over oil. And of course, in that Afghanistan also happens to be the opium capital. That's just all the better because the CIA's job is to track, monitor, and control all of the global movements and production of all kinds of illicit drugs, primarily to fund their black projects, the number one of which is their underground secret bases. They're also angry because we went into Libya and then Egypt. So right now, again, as I've said this before, guys, try to imagine how would America feel if Russia had gone down and attacked and overcame Mexico and turned Mexico into a communist state. Well, and to a certain degree, that's what we've also done in Syria. Okay, so I can see where the Russian bear is really angry. Now, let's tie this back to Bible prophecy. We know that Ezekiel 38 and 39 is talking about a time when the Russians come down to attack Israel, and in the middle of that, they get an evil thought and they run over and attack America too. I believe that that is the second attack associated with the end, associated with Armageddon. However, the next big attack with destruction of America is going to be when the Russians attack in the early days of World War III. Now, let me refresh your memory. On April 15th, 2002, and I know some of you may not want to believe this. Maybe you don't believe God talks anymore, but I can't help. I can't help that, and I can't back up to try to fit into a little comfortable box what you believe. This is what God has spoken, and that's, since this is not my microphone, this is God's microphone, I speak what he brings to me. On April 15th, 2002, Prophet Leslie Johnson was given a dream, and she was shown 7 prophecies, 2 of which have already come to pass, proving that the dream is accurate, and we better listen to the rest of it. 1, Arafat will go into the hospital. 2, he will die in the hospital, already both fulfilled. 3, Israel will give the Palestinians a state. The Palestinian state will be a temporary measure to allow the Israelis time to strengthen their military. Oil will be discovered in Israel. The oil will cause the Jews to be willing to fight for the land. Finally, Israel and America will go against the rest of the Arab world, and I believe that is the World War III. Then, January 22, 2006, God spoke audibly to her in the night and gave her the very words of newspaper headlines of the future. And this is not, I repeat, not the order that they were given, but this is the order that it is, in my opinion, that they will occur. Now, again, so we will see how they occur, whatever order. But nevertheless, this is what was spoken. Omer ushers in Palestinian state. Catastrophe hits America. One of America's greatest times of need. Israel refuses help to America. Israel is attacked. America sends troops. Chaos reigns as Americans protest help to Israel. Then she heard my voice, quoting the angel Gabriel that spoke to Dmitry Duduman, saying, "The fall of America will start with an internal revolution started by the communists. Some of the people will start fighting against the government. The government will be busy with internal problems. Then from the oceans, Russia, Cuba, Nicaragua, Central America, Mexico, and 2 other countries will attack and defeat America in one day. In 1 hour, such great riches will come to naught." Now, there's more to that, and you can get all of that in a book called Prophecies of the Fall of America, available through the Prophecy Club. But for now, I'm going to keep moving on and trying to make my point. Russia is furious. She is so angry that we have gone over and overthrown these nations right up next to her. And she has, I believe she's already, in matter of fact, Michael Boldea also agrees that Russia already has the military capability of defeating America in one day, in 1 hour. Oh, Stan, how can that be? Okay, let me play this scenario. How about if Russia sends a submarine off of our east and west coast, and they send one single nuclear warhead, and that might not come from a submarine, it might come down from satellite, and they set it off at exactly the right position, and it fries every computer chip in America with an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse. So all of a sudden, nothing electronic works in America. Nothing. No radio, no TV, no car starts. That was made since 1985 anyway. Nothing works. We don't understand what happens. But then, all of a sudden, from the oceans, all kinds of nuclear missiles are launched, landing up and down the east and west coasts, simultaneously coming down through Alaska, down through Minnesota, which is what the prophets have been shown, and also simultaneously coming up through Mexico, foot troops, tanks that have been hidden away for many years, now all of a sudden are rolling down our interstates, and they are taking over our nation, and with one day. And I can see the time when one President Obama is almost ready to break a leg as he runs toward the red phone to call Russia, call off the attack, stop the bombing. But the phone continues to ring. Come on, Russia, pick up. Come on, Russia, pick up, stop the bombing. But no one answers because Russia is not done. Russia, in one day, will thoroughly burn her with fire, says Revelation. Then, after that, is when Daniel Davis and his dream was shown. He said the man came upon TV, and he looked like he was probably the president's spokesman, and he said three things. He said, the United States of America, as you have known it, has ceased to exist. All property lines have been dissolved, and the U.S. dollar is worthless. Brothers and sisters, those are the words of a surrender. There was only one more phrase that was not shown in the dream that probably will be stated just before those phrases, and that phrase would probably be, as of so-and-so, such and such date and time, the United States of America, under the leadership of President Barack Hussein Obama, surrendered to Russia in an unconditional surrender, and that's when he says the United States, as you have known it, has ceased to exist. That's when he will say all property lines are dissolved and the U.S. dollar is worthless. In other words, we are a defeated nation. Then, as Bree Keaton was shown when she went to Israel and she was praying over Sodom and Gomorrah, God told her audibly to go there and pray that the oil would be released. I could talk about that too, but I'll keep on. Anyway, as she's on her knees praying, two angels appeared beside her and took her up, one by each arm, took her high above the earth, looking down upon America. And she said she saw missiles come out of the ocean and land all up and down the east and west coasts of the United States. Then she saw massive fighting up and down the center of the United States. Well, see, that matches what the other prophets have spoken, where they said that after the bombs landed up and down the coastal areas, then in the center of the United States would be where Russia attacks down through Alaska, down through Minnesota, and up through Texas. And then we see Russia, Cuba, Nicaragua, Central America, Mexico, and two of the countries attack. And I believe those two of the countries will probably be Venezuela and Iraq. Yeah, that's right. Okay, you watch. See, we have made the evil people that started terrorism in Iraq angry at us. And that's the reason they will not delight in silver or gold, but they will say, Lord, we offend not, because they have striven against the Lord. That's the way the King James says it. In other words, they've broken the everlasting covenant. They've sinned before God, and we sin not as we destroy them. And, unfortunately, The Lord God Almighty Elohim that sent his own flesh to die on the cross for us, that has been rejected, kicked out of our schools, kicked out of our marriages, kicked out of our businesses, kicked out of our health care plans, kicked out of our dental and our medical offices, then that God will say, and I agree, I will allow this destruction to take place. 1997, Virginia Boldea, the daughter of Dimitri Duduman, said 2 days before taking my father to the hospital, I heard his voice in the early morning hours say, I saw something. As usual, I got my recorder and went to his bedside, but he would not let me record it. I don't remember everything he said, but I would like to share with you what I can remember. My father stated, the Lord showed me a very large bear. It was as big as a building, and it began to do battle with an unarmed man. Okay, who's the bear? In prophecy, the Russian bear is who she's talking about, okay? You go into Daniel chapter 7. Then who's the unarmed man? Well, those would be the people that would be going against Russia. Then God will raise up China and Japan and many of the nations. They'll go against the Russians. They'll defeat the Russians. They'll back the Russians to the gates of Paris where they sign a peace treaty. The unarmed man represents China and Japan and many of the nations that go against the Russians. However, let's look and see how the battle goes. Let's continue. Do you see what I've shown you? This is how it will be when the hardships come over America. No one will be able to defend her. Only those who trust in me will be spared. Everything will start as a heavy rain on a sunny day, at a time you least expect it. There was more, but I don't remember the rest. Now, as a further confirmation, this is one of the last 3 messages given to Dimitri in April of 1997. And it's talking about the Russian bear coming back to life. Now, you see, with perestroika and glasnost, the Russians convinced the West that they were weak and powerless and that we won the Cold War and that the bear was asleep. However, that's not what the prophets say. Dimitri says, I knelt beside my bed to pray as I do every night before I go to sleep. In other words, he prayed morning and night. He had a prayer closet like Daniel. And if you want God's protection in the trouble ahead, you better be praying the same way. After finishing my prayer, I opened my eyes, but I was no longer in my room. Instead, I found myself in a forest. I looked around to my right. I saw a man. Now, this is the angel that would come to him. I saw a man dressed in white who pointed his finger and said, see and remember. It took me a while to find out what he was pointing at. Why, it was a small bear who seemed half dead lying on the ground. As I continued to watch this bear, it began to breathe deeper. With every passing minute, it seemed to revive itself, and as I watched, it also became angrier. Then it began to grow. Soon it was larger than the forest floor, and it grew larger and continued to become angrier. It then began to paw the ground, so that when its paw would hit the ground, the earth would shudder. The bear continued to devastate all that stood in its path until it came upon some men with sticks trying to fend it off. Who's the bear? It's Russia. And who are the men with sticks trying to fend it off? Well, that's China, Japan, and many other nations. So what the prophet is saying is that Russia is actually already strong enough to defeat the Western nations. And she sits as a coiled snake, ready to strike. And every time America goes over and tries to act like the big bully and overcomes these nations, Libya, Egypt, Syria, all of this is making this angry bear madder and madder. Now let's continue. By this time, the bear had grown so large that it simply crushed the men underfoot and continued to rampage. I was stunned by what I saw and asked the man sitting beside me, what does this mean? At first, they thought the great bear was dead, the man said. As it will begin to stir once more, they will consider it harmless. Suddenly, it will grow strong once more with purpose and violence. God, now listen to this, God will blind the eyes of those that continue to trample on the sacrifice of Christ's blood until the day that the bear will strike swiftly. This day will catch them unprepared, and it will be just as you saw. The man then said, tell my people that the days are numbered and the sentence has been passed. Now, what's he saying? Who is this group that says continue upon the sacrifice of Christ's blood? Well, look, before you can trample upon the sacrifice of Christ's blood, you have to first have Christ's blood. So that would be the Western powers that know about Christ but don't follow his teachings. Know any nations like that? Okay, and then down here where it says, and this will catch them unprepared.
America was once a nation that was very blessed by God. I recall growing up, the morals within the community were much higher than the morals we have today. Children were held accountable for their actions, not to mention every man and every woman. There was most certainly a moral code within this nation. Throughout my almost 52 years living in this country, I have witnessed the decline greatly of morality and of human life. Back then, if a child stole, let's say candy from a store, was found out by the parents, those parents would hightail them back to the store and force them to return the candy, and the child would stand before the store owner, apologizing in humility. And most likely the child would undergo a punishment at home. Today, either parents are too busy to even pay attention to what their kid is doing, or if they are busted, the child may be reprimanded but allowed to keep the stolen goods. I was raised in a very strict home. I addressed my father with yes sir, no sir. Today, I hear kids not only being out of line, but downright abusive, calling their parents names in public. Either the parent coddles the kid thinking, oh, they must be going through something, or the parent simply ignores it. If I talked to my parents the way kids of this generation do, I wouldn't be here today. And I thank my parents for teaching me respect. Today, we live in a country that it is okay for a 14-year-old to obtain the morning after pill without parental consent. I see young girls walking around dressed like hookers. I recall one time thinking to myself, my goodness, if their parents saw them dressed this way, they would flip out. Then I heard the young girl on the other side of the aisle calling for her mother and asking if she could have the bright red tube of lipstick. Many parents today say, oh, let them be free to express themselves, teaching them not to honor and respect their bodies as God has taught in His holy word, and not minding the middle-aged man drooling at their teenage daughter. 50-some years ago, people honored much more the 10 Commandments of God. 50 years ago, we had small churches where everyone knew each other. Not like today, where we have mega churches and you are slapped with a name tag. When I was growing up, if a family was suffering, say the husband lost his job, the men of the neighborhood gathered together, pitching in to help pay the bills. The wives would cook up dishes to deliver, and love and encouragement were given. Not to mention the men, what they did to help their neighbor to find a job. Today, the husband, father, he sits alone in worry, with no support, and he is lucky if he can borrow $10 for gas to go on a job interview from his neighbor. 50 years ago, we didn't have cell phones, internet, or even cable TV. We always sat at the dinner table as a family. Even if Dad was running late, we would wait. There wasn't kids sitting there at the table, texting their friends or Facebooking. We had face-to-face communications with one another. We didn't hear of our friends' news through Twitter. We waited to see them at the bus stop. 50 years later, we have homes, always empty, because either both parents have to work to pay the mortgage, the car notes. Majority of Americans today need to have the brand new cars with all the bells and whistles, whereas 50 years ago, we were grateful the car ran. I bring up just a few key points to show a nation that once honored God in schools, courthouses, churches, and homes. Now we have slowly taken God out of all and have desensitized ourselves. Today, a child can't pray or read a Bible on free time in school. No, that child now gets placed on the evening news because it's taboo to do. Today, it is the norm for a woman to have 3, 4, 5 children out of wedlock, and even at times supported and encouraged to do so, saying, "You go, girl, you don't need a man." Yet mama struggles on every level to put food on her table, and no neighbor is dropping off a dish. Yet we have people stating God is still blessing America. How can God bless a nation that has turned their backs on Him, protesting against the 10 Commandments, saying it's okay to have a man lie with a man and a woman with a woman, and pastors marrying gay couples under God, succumbing to the pressures of the secular world and not obeying the holy word? America, my friends, is not blessed. It is run by evil and greed, and a lack of morality at every turn. Abortions is the new form of birth control. Divorces are at an all-time high. Couples would rather live together in sin because it is easier. Today, people barely even know who their neighbor is, and our youth are taught it is more important to be involved with sports than attend a church. Our homeless and veterans are tossed aside, and there are more shelters for animals than human beings. Our value of life is diminished greatly. Churches were originally put in place to assist the less fortunate. Today, churches are more concerned with how much is in the tithing bucket. When we fail to honor God in all things, how then can we expect God to honor us? If only America would turn back to morality and our God, and Christians would be shining examples of what God intended us to be. Seeing someone suffer and offering a prayer is not placing your faith in action, is not helping your fellow neighbor. For prayers are heard on high, and God is waiting on all of us to act. To receive a blessing, we must be a blessing. When God sees the people restoring Him back into this country, then and only then will we be called America the Blessed.